I brought gifts to Christmas, but my sister smiled. This year's just for real family. I nodded, left quietly, then heard her laugh. He thinks paying the mortgage gets him a seat. That night, I transferred the deed. By morning, her key didn't work, and my phone had 26 missed calls. I, 32M, pulled into the driveway of what I still called the family house on Christmas Eve, watching the warm glow spill from every window. The bags of carefully chosen gifts filled my back seat. A gaming console for my nephew, jewelry for my sister, books for my niece. I'd spent weeks planning, wanting this Christmas to be perfect after the rocky year we'd all had. The house looked exactly as it had when Mom and Dad were alive, down to the wreath on the front door. My sister had kept everything pristine, which made sense since she'd been living there rent-free for the past 3 years while I covered the mortgage payments for my apartment across town. I grabbed the gifts and walked up the familiar path, my breath visible in the cold air. Through the window, I could see my sister's husband setting up a camera to record the kids opening presents. The scene looked like something from a holiday movie, except I was apparently not part of the cast. When I knocked, my sister opened the door with that bright smile she'd perfected over the years. She looked at the bags in my hands, then at my face, and something shifted in her expression. She told me that this year was different. This year was just for real family. She said it with such casual certainty that for a moment, I thought I'd misheard. I asked what she meant by real family, and she explained that she'd been thinking about it a lot lately. How family wasn't just about blood or shared history, but about who really belonged together. She gestured toward the warm house behind her, where I could hear my nephew laughing at something on TV. The words hit me like ice water. I stood there holding bags of gifts I'd spent my last bonus on, looking at the woman who'd called me crying just 6 months ago when the furnace broke down, begging me to cover the repair costs. I nodded and told her I understood. What else could I say? I set the gifts down on the porch and told her to give them to the kids whenever she felt it was appropriate. She thanked me and said she knew I'd understand. She said I was always so reasonable about these things. I walked back to my car slowly, my hands shaking from something that wasn't entirely the cold. As I reached for the door handle, I heard her voice carrying across the yard. She was talking to someone inside, probably her husband, and her tone was completely different now, lighter, almost amused. She said I thought that paying the mortgage somehow earned me a seat at the table. She laughed, that sharp little laugh she'd had since we were kids. She said it was cute. Really, how I'd kept throwing money at the house like that would make me belong. I sat in my car for a full minute, engine off, listening to the sound of my own breathing. 23 years we'd been siblings. 23 years of shared bedrooms, family vacations, inside jokes, and late-night conversations about everything and nothing. 3 years of me quietly handling the mortgage so she could stay in our childhood home with her family. And I was not real family. I drove home in silence, my mind surprisingly clear. I'd always been the practical one, the planner, the one who handled the paperwork when our parents died. I still had all the documents from the estate settlement, including the deed that sat in my fireproof safe. Back at my apartment, I poured myself a drink and opened my laptop. The county clerk's office had an online portal for property transfers. I'd used it before for work. I was a real estate attorney, after all. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house was titled in both our names, but with my sister listed as a tenant in common. What she'd apparently forgotten, in all her wisdom about real versus fake family, was that I held the mortgage solely in my name. Every payment for 3 years had come from my account. I pulled up the transfer documents and began filling them out. The house would go entirely to me, with her tenancy terminated immediately. It was completely legal. She'd signed papers when I took over the mortgage that gave me the right to do exactly this if she defaulted on our agreement. Of course, we'd never had a formal rental agreement. That had been my mistake, trusting family to act like family. I submitted the paperwork electronically and paid the rush processing fee. The beauty of Christmas Eve was that government offices were closed, but electronic systems still ran. The transfer would be official by morning, and I'd already contacted a locksmith service that worked holidays. At 6 a.m. on Christmas Day, I drove back to the house. The locksmith was already there, a cheerful guy who told me he appreciated the holiday pay. I handed him the new deed paperwork and watched him work. By 7 a.m., every lock on the house had been changed. I paid the locksmith in cash and wished him a Merry Christmas. Then I went home and waited. My phone started ringing at 8:47 a.m. My sister's name appeared on the screen, and I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. By noon, I had 26 missed calls and 17 text messages. I didn't need to read them to know what they said. The progression was predictable: confusion, anger, threats, and finally, desperation. I made myself a proper Christmas dinner, just for me, since I apparently wasn't real family anyway, and settled in to enjoy the quiet. Update 1. The voicemails were exactly what I'd expected. The first few were confused, my sister asking why her key didn't work, wondering if I'd changed the locks for security reasons. Then came anger when she realized what had happened. She called me names I won't repeat and threatened to call the police. The later messages were different. Her voice was shaky, desperate. She talked about the kids' presents under the tree, about having nowhere else to go, about how this was all a misunderstanding. The final voicemail was her husband. He was calmer, more calculated. He explained that they'd been under stress lately, that my sister hadn't meant what she said. He offered to sit down and work something out, maybe formalize a rental agreement. I deleted every message without finishing them. By evening, my phone had stopped ringing. I assumed they'd found somewhere to stay, her husband's parents, maybe, or a hotel. Not my problem anymore. The next morning, I drove to the house to assess what needed to be done. I wanted to see the property with fresh eyes, figure out what updates might be needed if I decided to sell. What I found was my sister sitting on the front porch in yesterday's clothes, looking like she hadn't slept. She saw my car and stood up immediately. She asked what I thought I was doing, and I told her I was checking on my property. She said this was insane, that I couldn't just kick them out of their home. I reminded her that it had never been her home. She'd been living there as my guest, and guests could be asked to leave. She tried a different approach then. She apologized for what she'd said, claimed it had come out wrong. She said she'd been stressed about money and took it out on me unfairly. I asked her about the part where she laughed about me thinking mortgage payments earned me a seat at the table. She went quiet at that. She finally asked what I wanted from her, and I told her the truth. I wanted her to understand that actions have consequences. I wanted her to learn that family loyalty isn't a one-way street. She started crying then, talking about the kids and how traumatic this was for them. She said they didn't understand why they couldn't go home. I felt a pang of guilt about my nephew and niece. They were innocent in all this. But they weren't my responsibility. They had two parents who should have thought about consequences before deciding I wasn't real family. I offered her a deal. She could rent the house from me at fair market value, about 3 times what I'd been paying in mortgage costs, or she could find somewhere else to live. She had 30 days to decide. She called me heartless and selfish. She said our parents would be ashamed of me. I told her our parents raised us to treat family with respect, and perhaps she should have remembered that lesson. Update 2. Word got out quickly in our small town. Family friends started calling, asking what was going on, trying to mediate. The story they'd heard was that I'd cruelly evicted my sister and her children on Christmas Day over some minor argument. My sister had apparently painted herself as the victim, conveniently leaving out the part about declaring me not real family or laughing about my mortgage payments. I decided to set the record straight. I forwarded the security camera footage from the front porch to several family friends. Footage that clearly showed me being turned away on Christmas Eve, along with audio of my sister's comments afterward. The camera had been installed for security after a break-in in the neighborhood, but it turned out to be useful for more than just burglars. The tone of the conversations changed quickly after that. Suddenly, people were asking my sister what she'd been thinking, not asking me to reconsider. My uncle called to tell me he was proud of me for standing up for myself. He said he'd always thought my sister took advantage of my generosity, and it was about time someone called her on it. My sister's husband reached out again, this time through a lawyer. They were threatening to sue for wrongful eviction and claiming they had tenants' rights. I forwarded their lawyer's letter to my own attorney, along with all the documentation showing that my sister had never paid rent, never signed a lease, and had actually signed papers acknowledging that her residency was contingent on my continued mortgage payments. My lawyer called their bluff immediately. They had no case, and everyone knew it. By the end of January, my sister had found a rental across town. It was smaller than the family house, older, and significantly more expensive than what she'd been paying me, which was nothing. She made one last attempt at reconciliation, showing up at my apartment with a store-bought cake and an apology. She said she'd learned her lesson and wanted to rebuild our relationship. I appreciated the gesture. I told her, But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt with cake and generic apologies. She'd shown me exactly how she felt about our relationship when she thought it was safe to do so. She asked if I'd ever be able to forgive her, and I said maybe someday. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it certainly didn't mean putting myself in a position to be hurt the same way again. She left the cake and walked away. I haven't heard from her since. Update 3. It's been 6 months now since that Christmas Eve. I still live in my apartment, but I've been spending more time at the family house, fixing it up, making it mine instead of just a shrine to our childhood. I turned Mom's old sewing room into a home office. I updated the kitchen with appliances that actually work. I planted a garden in the backyard, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the space for in my apartment. The house feels different now. Lighter somehow. It's not weighed down by obligation and resentment anymore. I've started dating someone, a woman I met at a coffee shop who knows nothing about my family drama and likes me for who I am now, not who I was expected to be. Sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh. If maybe I should have given my sister another chance, been the bigger person, turned the other cheek. Then I remember Christmas Eve. I remember standing on that porch with bags of gifts, being told I wasn't real family by someone I'd supported for 3 years. I remember her laughter, her casual cruelty, the way she dismissed everything I'd done as meaningless. Real family doesn't treat each other that way. I kept the gifts I'd bought that Christmas. My nephew's gaming console sits in my closet, still in its box. My niece's books are on my shelf. My sister's jewelry is in a drawer somewhere. Maybe someday I'll give them to the kids when they're older, when they can understand what really happened and why. Maybe I'll tell them that real family isn't about blood or shared history. It's about respect, loyalty, and love that goes both ways. Or maybe I'll just let them figure it out for themselves, the way I had to. The house is quiet now, but it's a good quiet. It's the quiet of a space that belongs to someone who appreciates it, who earned the right to be there. And when people ask me about family now, I tell them that family is what you make it. Some people are lucky enough to be born into it. Others have to build it from scratch, one relationship at a time, with people who actually want them around. I'm learning to be okay with being in the second category. The mortgage payments are still the same amount every month, but now they're building equity in something that's truly mine. The deed sits in my safe with my name alone on it, and every month when I make that payment, I remember that it's not buying me a seat at anyone's table. It's building me a table of my own.